Support comes from the St. Louis Public Library Foundation. During these challenging times, free access to digital resources is a necessity. You can help our community stay connected. Support your St. Louis Public Library at slpl.org.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. When I first moved to St. Louis in 2010, a lot of city residents I met had very dismissive views of St. Charles County. They saw it as a deeply conservative place emblematic of suburban sprawl. But the longer I've lived here, the more I've questioned that perception. Yes, it is definitely suburban, much like where I came of age in Lake County, Illinois. And yes, it is definitely Republican-leaning, especially now with the GOP controlling every county, state, and federal office. But St. Charles County could be in the midst of a major political change. Earlier this month, voters soundly rejected a property tax freeze and rejected conservative candidates to the Francis Howell School Board. St. Peter's resident Melissa Duson found these results surprising, especially since she's accustomed to seeing her neighbors diverge from her on politics.
I do definitely feel like a blue dot and have most of the time I've lived here. I do have, pockets of people in my inner circle that don't align with like MAGA Republicans, and that's by design. But I don't necessarily think that the demographics have changed too much, at least not from my perspective. But attitudes are definitely shifting. People are just tired.
In this lead up to midterm elections, political reporters are looking for any clues about what could happen in November. April elections are not precise indicators, especially because turnout during those contests are low. But when placed in context, the municipal election results shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. After all, in the past decade, St. Charles County voters approved statewide ballot initiatives raising the minimum wage, expanding Medicaid, legalizing recreational marijuana, and they also rejected right to work and overturned Missouri's abortion ban. Jamie Martin is with Francis Howell Forward, who helped a slate of candidates who do not identify as conservative prevail earlier this month. She says years of political organizing helped those contenders gain ground in traditionally Republican parts of St. Charles County.
We're not just getting new voters or new move-ins to the county. We're bringing over their voters, and we're doing that because we have a nonpartisan message. We're doing that because we refuse to play party politics, and we're willing to hold anyone accountable that needs to be held accountable, and we're willing to run anyone who's friendly to public education. So we have tapped into the community sentiment that these divisive politics are not helping anyone. They're certainly not helping our kids, right? We've lost so much institutional knowledge, so much of our administration. Our teacher retention has been hurt by all of this. We had a student-centered campaign. We had a future-focused message, and it had nothing to do with party.
The failure of the property tax freeze even surprised people who were working to defeat it, like Ted House. He's a former Democratic state legislator and judge who contended that the proposition would devastate public services. And House says that message landed with St. Charles County's electorate.
Once they had the facts, they're saying, hey, this is bad for schools, it's bad for fire, it's bad for ambulance, it's bad for the disability services community in St. Charles County, it's terrible for libraries. And yes, nobody likes paying property tax, but that's how you build a strong community.
So the big question is this. Do these election results from earlier this month, as well as other recent state ballot initiative results, show that Democrats can compete in St. Charles County? Carol Banas says it is possible. The St. Charles resident is a Democratic committee woman and a longtime observer of politics in St. Charles County. She says it used to be very hard to get people there to vote for Democratic candidates.
We knocked for Claire McCaskill, for example, okay? And we had people, when we handed them the brochure, they'd answer the door and we handed the brochure and they'd look at it and they say, I'll never vote for her, she's pro-abortion. And that was the only thing that they were considering.
Even though President Donald Trump won St. Charles County 3 times, Bana says people are tired of his chaotic administration.
And now they're looking at, well, I really like that Mexican restaurant, and those people are really having a lot of trouble staffing. Or my next door neighbor got stopped by ICE, and they're the nicest people in the world, and they wouldn't even let them defend themselves. Or I don't like paying $1 more for gasoline because he wants some dictatorship overturned.
On the same day of the municipal elections, Trump threatened to destroy Iran's civilization, and less than a week later sent an AI-generated picture depicting himself as Jesus Christ, a depiction he now denies. O'Fallon resident Rebecca Hawks-Cates says the president's recent controversies could end up helping Democrats in St. Charles County.
And I think where we could see an opportunity for Democrats to pick up out here is the behavior of this administration is both encouraging people like me to really want to get out and vote and encourage people to vote, whereas maybe people who are conservative are less motivated. So maybe they're not going to directly vote for a Democrat, but by withholding their Republican vote, that is in essence giving Democrats more of a voice.
If Democrats do start gaining that ground in St. Charles County, it could be one of many steps needed for the party to regain its footing in statewide or congressional elections. But even people who were exuberant over the April election results say people should be cautious before assuming that St. Charles County is in the midst of a complete ideological metamorphosis. Harvester resident Aaron Shetler, for instance, does not believe conservative St. Charles County residents are transforming into liberals, even if they didn't like the property tax freeze plan or rejected the self-identified conservative school board candidates. Instead, Shetler says that voters in her county simply want to move politics past where it's been since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We cracked during COVID. Like, the county meetings started to become protests, the school board meetings turned into shouting matches. And I think that we were, during that time, very vulnerable to blaming each other and getting really ugly. And that vitriol kind of seeped in to our school boards and took hold. And it got very non-serious for quite a while. And I think people just got fed up with it. I really don't believe that we're going through a blue wave. I believe we're going through a seriousness wave of, I want actual candidates, and I don't care what their label is, at least for the school board election.
This case-by-case approach that Shetler is alluding to arguably happened just a few miles east in western St. Louis County. People in that traditionally Republican stronghold drifted away from Trump over the past decade, but still elected Republicans to Congress and the state legislature. And Carl Bearden says the disconnect between Democrats prevailing on issues but failing to win state or county-based offices could have a lot to do with who is moving in. Bearden says that many former residents of North St. Louis County who typically voted Democratic but have more conservative positions on guns and abortion have become St. Charles County residents.
I think from a standpoint of policies, particularly the older style Democrats, they're probably more in line with the conservative social policies and so forth of Republicans. On some issues, I think they remain a lot more independent.
Bearden, a former Republican state lawmaker, does not think the April results are indicative of what will happen in November, especially since the turnout will be much higher a few months from now. But he adds it is possible for Democrats to build strength in St. Charles County if they're willing to be patient.
You mentioned candidates a couple times, and particularly in an area like St. Charles, that makes a lot of difference. If you get a good Democrat candidate who's willing to work it, who connects with people, that makes it a far more dangerous than if you just throw a D on the ballot, because that doesn't get it done.
If Democrats are able to prevail in some state legislative contests or narrow the gap in congressional districts that include St. Charles County, it could be a sign that the April results were not an aberration, but a sign of a political shift that could impact Missouri state politics.
This episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum with production assistance from Alex Hoyer. Audio engineering and podcast design by Emily Woodbury.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.